Welcome, welcome. I'm Art. I run BlockchainNYC.org. So most of you here probably because of that. We do a lot of events. We try to focus in a lot of different areas. We had a workshop last week on financial innovation. We have had logistics. We have actually coming up. We have tend to cover a lot of ground with the blockchain. And today I'm super excited to have you here because we have 4 fantastic speakers, and we'll be focusing a lot more on smart cities, on smart contracts, media. What is coming? How can our life be different? And I'm not going to be introducing the panel yet because we have a moderator for that. But we have actually a quick announcement from Peter Borovic, who's working on a new project. I don't know if you guys heard of him, but he was just featured on large data in Forbes on Monday. So if you would like to see the article, we'll probably mail it out. So he'll give a couple of words about what's coming on his end and what projects he's working on, because it's really exciting and I think it's very relevant for the audience. Peter, please come in. Let's give him a round of applause, please. All right.
Thank you, Art. So the announcement is obviously, thing is blockchain today, right? But every blockchain in New York City is always about crypto. So I'm 2 things. My name is Peter Borovic. I'm 2 things. First off, I'm a blockchain architect at BlockchainDriven. So we're doing blockchain for multinational organizations, for public and private enterprise in the world. And then I'm also an algorithmic trader at XNV, which is a crypto fund. And what happened is we are getting too many requests from the retail investors about our AI solutions for the fund. So we are trying to basically make these solutions a little bit more commercial, a little bit more to the retail investors. So question for you is, how many of you here own crypto right now? Okay, so how many of you, honest answer, how many of you are down since the beginning of this year? Well, because you've been trading our algorithms. Our algorithms are actually up. So there's no shorts in the market, but you can still massage the things, right? You can, AI figures it out for you. So that's what we're working on right now. The AI solution that takes into consideration news, social media sentiment, price action, hashing power in every blockchain development in the world possible. Conferences, bad news, good news, all this stuff is placed together into fancy algorithms. And then on the end, you have a product. And we're trying to make that product for the retail users. So I'm almost done. Whoever is interested to learn more about this and give me more feedback about what you guys are looking for, please talk to me after the panel. I'm done. Thank you so much.
Say the name of your company again.
Which one?
The one that you want us to talk to you about.
BlockchainDriven.
Okay. Thank you.
Easy. Always easy.
All right, enough about it with announcements. Now we are going to be meeting into the meat and potatoes of our panel. So we have a fantastic panel, which I'm not going to be introduced yet because we got a moderator coming up. But I will introduce the moderator. So Nick Walker, he will be moderating the panel. He is part of a blockchain-driven consultancy. He has seen a lot of interesting projects. He has worked on a lot of interesting projects. And he'll be excellent guide for you today to kind of walk through what is blockchain doing, where it's going, how it can affect. And with our speakers, I think I'm very excited to hear what they have to say. And our moderator, Nick Walker, will help us do that. All right, let's welcome him.
Thank you. So welcome. We're going to be talking about blockchain, smart cities, media, advertising, and we're going to try avoid talking about Bitcoin, Ethereum, and some of the cryptocurrencies and focus more on the underlying technology today. So without further ado, Lillian, if you'd like to start and introduce yourself.
There we go. Hey guys, I'm Lillian Ruiz. I'm co-founder and head of operations at Civil Media Company. We're a decentralized marketplace for journalism. We use a crypto token and crypto economics to allow for self-governance between journalists and readers without influence from third parties. So that is that.
That was very succinct. My name is Tyler Gold. I currently work at Vice Media, but just to be clear, I'm here as an enthusiast. I used to work at The Verge, and I covered technology and all kinds of stories for them. been following blockchain since too long now. And I'm just really excited about the implications that this could have for the media space and especially for cities and the kind of institutions that exist now. So looking forward to talking to you guys about it.
Hi everyone, my name is Maggie Shu and I lead business development at AirSwap. AirSwap is essentially a peer-to-peer trading network, so think of it like an eBay where peers can meet and find each other, and it's for trading ERC20 tokens, so Ethereum-based tokens. It's decentralized, it's really exciting. We'll talk about the timeline, but I think it's kind of the new way of trading, and if any of you trade on centralized exchanges, I think decentralized is really the way to go.
Hi everyone, I'm Karen Bhatia. I'm Vice President of Creative and Applied Tech at the New York City Economic Development Corporation. I basically head our tech strategy. We are the economic engine of the city. We try to identify what are the technologies that we want New York City to be the hub of, where we can promote innovation as well as business development, integration of technologies into larger enterprises, and to ultimately promote good job growth. And one of the areas that's at the forefront of our list right now is blockchain development and how we can help companies in New York.
Thank you. So the first question tonight that I have for our panel is centered around your vision for the smart city. How does blockchain, how do other emerging technologies play together in your vision of what the smart city looks like, particularly within the focus of your companies and your ideas? If anyone would.
I'll go first. So I didn't mention this in my introduction, but I used to work with the Manhattan Borough President's Office when I was a little bit younger. And at the time, I was working really closely with the community boards that are kind of used to make very local politics decisions within New York City across the 5 different boroughs. And so at the time, I obviously had no idea of blockchain or what the implications would be, but that idea of like that local versus state versus larger kind of government was always very interesting. And now looking at the potentials of blockchain, I think it's very apparent that we can kind of bridge those gaps that currently exist between the local, the state, and the higher levels of government. And so, you know, I don't pretend to have any answers on that, but maybe we can discuss some of those things. I'm sure you have some ideas, Karen. But I think that, like, at the end of the day, this could actually, blockchain has the most potential to me to bring about some change in local communities, because right now I feel like the internet is really kind of referencing growth in like large numbers and scale rather than that kind of like local sense.
I think that blockchain can affect cities in a variety of ways. One, from the very basic, just how cities work. I'm thinking about greater transparency, greater seamlessness, less administration, less paperwork when it comes to all sorts of issues, whether it's internally within government. You could look at procurement and how that could be streamlined if you're able to utilize technologies like blockchain. If you're looking at kind of outward applications and how it could affect everyday citizens, exactly what you're talking about right now, it's how do you effectively integrate a variety of agencies in the local level, state level, federal level as well. I mean, one of the things that I think about is, and this is later on down the line, we're working step by step within government itself, but you know, you hear about instances in certain countries in which they have digital IDs already on the blockchain, and what an incredible effect it actually is able to have on the citizens. If you're able to vote online, if you're able to pay your taxes on, who here still has to pay their taxes? And if you think about just what an onerous process that could be versus in a process in which you're able to integrate all the information and you have control over all your information, and it's something that is seamless that you can do, I mean, that's pretty powerful. And so we think about certain countries, for example, like Dubai, in which they're able to streamline a lot of the processes that they currently have. That's pretty instrumental to the everyday citizen. But the third way that I think about how blockchain could affect everyday life as well is, and this is where I think it's very exciting, is to think about the new types of markets and products and services that are being developed, the new type of business models that are being developed as well, and how it can potentially, you know, as opposed to the internet, bridge the divide in terms of who has access and who doesn't have access. To build these products, to actually have access to these products as well, we're thinking about some of the innovations that have been coming around blockchain, especially in emerging markets, markets has been pretty powerful. So how can we as a city try to develop that kind of innovation in areas that are not as privileged within New York City itself? How do we make sure that they're integrated and collaborated with when products and services are created too? I think that's where there's a lot of excitement that's coming around this as well.
That was an incredible answer, and I think I would just add that on the services side, which is how I think about it, interacting with the city, things like hotels, things like utilities. And so I started my career at Hilton Hotels, and when I was at Hilton, we were afraid of Airbnb coming and disrupting us. And it was this thing where they were taking the hotel and disaggregating it, and what were people doing with their own apartments. And I think taking that one step further, and you've probably heard about how blockchain could potentially even disintermediate Airbnb, because at the core of it, it's still a centralized system. It's still taking fees on every transaction. So what if you could have the citizens of the city interacting in this truly peer-to-peer way, and however that's set up. Same thing with utilities and power, and there are a number of blockchain startups looking at, taking, if you have extra power, can you sell that to someone else? If you have extra file sharing space, what are these micro networks that can be used? And so taking these central institutions that we essentially rely on as a citizen of a city and breaking that out.
Yeah, and just kind of piggybacking on a couple of different points. Obviously, one of the ones that is particularly exciting to me is this idea of being able to use blockchain to allow groups of people, groups of communities to have this access to self-governance and to essentially sort of leapfrog, technology where it is now. So, for example, in the case of various groups that maybe haven't had a ton of access to previous technological advancements, it almost makes them ripe for seeing or being the beneficiaries of laying down the new pipelines for something like blockchain, where they can be sort of the initial purveyors of those systems. So that's exciting. And then just kind of going back to this idea of using blockchain for peer-to-peer self-governance, I think it also allows different industries, journalism being one of them, to sort of take back the reins of control in sort of this new and exciting place and be a part of a new era and industry of internet in a way that they can't currently do it in the existing Web 2.0. So really it's just this, it's both the technology and the inflection point that we're in right now that's pretty exciting.
And if we just stay on that for a second, what kind of projects and initiatives are you seeing already implementing these technologies, are kind of in the near short term going to be making impact? And how does that compare to your long-term vision? Things like projects that we don't even know how they're going to be built and what impact they're going to have down the line. I mean, some innovation on top of blockchain itself. So what projects are you seeing now? And then what's kind of your vision a little more long-term?
Yeah, I can take it first, and I'll start with a project that's not our own, just to spread the wealth. But there are really interesting projects in the sort of copyright and provenance and royalty management space. Ujo, which specializes, in sort of music royalty and that sort of thing, is really particularly exciting. It allows a lot of new controls for creatives that they haven't previously been able to engage in, which is interesting. You've got other projects, like a particularly cool one is one called Upgraded Tickets, which is about sort of reducing fraud in secondary markets. So when you're looking at projects like that and you're seeing this sort of ability to return revenue, profits back to the hands of their original purveyors, I think those are really exciting projects and play really nicely into the sort of stuff that at Civil we're interested in. So, yeah.
I'd say on my end, we're in this area of trade and fintech, and so AirSwap I think is pretty interesting because if you think about trading, and I don't know how many of you use like Coinbase or GDAX or something like that. A crypto exchange is not just a crypto exchange. You are storing your assets at this exchange, so it takes custody. It is acting as an exchange, so it's connecting peers, and it's also executing that transaction. So it's even more centralized than a regular exchange. And so when you've heard about the hacks of these exchanges, like you are at the mercy of these centralized exchanges. And so I never understood, if we're in this blockchain world, why are we going back towards a centralized trade model? And so I became really interested in the notion of decentralized trade. And so there are a number of projects out there. So 0x protocol has a number of relayers, Bancor, Kyber, ours. And I think that it's unclear which of these is going to win that battle, and everyone's trying to fight for liquidity, and everyone's trying to find institutional traders. I think, as Peter said earlier, around people who trade algorithmically, but something there is going to win.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting perspective on it too, because there's I'm definitely not the first person to say this, but there's a lot of hype around blockchain and cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin. And
really?
Yeah. Can you believe it or not? It's like a clickbait headline. But at the end of the day, like, there's definitely a dark side to this kind of stuff, and it's been proven time and time again with a bunch of different hacks, the Mt. Gox, and I'm sure that plenty of people in this room have been like trying to dump some crypto assets, and then Coinbase was just like, haha, just kidding. So like, it's a little like, almost like paradoxical to me about how like there's this dream of like this decentralized thing, and yet there still needs to be some type of centralized power to come in and like establish almost like a sense of like order, not necessarily law, but definitely some type of order, right? And to that extent, like, I look at Steemit, and I'm really excited about the potentials that has, because that is like kind of giving creators access to money in a different way, albeit in the form of like a proprietary cryptocurrency, right? And it's all kind of run through this one company, right? That's not to say that what Steem is doing is not like really exciting and amazing, and I could go on and talk about that a lot, but I think that looking at like the fact that like the founders of that company, for instance, are giving out large quantities of coins to new startups that are based off that blockchain and stuff is a very interesting kind of side to this thing that doesn't get talked about a lot.
I completely agree with that. I think one of the areas that I find really fascinating is the incentive mechanisms that are used, how you can provide, how people who are providing value, they're incentivized to do so. Going back to Steemit, I think that's a very good example, and I think that that's where a lot of the innovation is coming from right now. How are you able to foster that? One of the innovations, or kind of the areas in which I see blockchain being applied, ironically, yesterday they were speaking at, they were doing like a lightning talk, and it's how blockchain is applied in social services. There's an experiment going on right now by FUMI, and they're utilizing blockchain for social services for homeless populations here in New York. So how are they able to access services through different types of agencies, through shelters, and have access to that information? They own that information, and they're able to go from shelter to shelter, or they're able to access different types of services, and it's all integrated. All of that information is integrated as well. So there are interesting ways in which it's being applied in the private sector as well as the public sector as well. And I think that the way that there's some sort of a governance structure behind it and incentivization behind it as well is pretty fascinating.
Karen, what was the name of that project again? Write that down, everyone. Sounds like an interesting project. And so how does, and particularly staying on the media aspect of things and on Steemit, how does that also tip the scales in terms of fake news? Do you see this being able to fight fake news? Do you see it as actually encouraging fake news because you're just monetizing very clickbaity titles? What are you guys' opinions and perspectives on that?
My perspective pretty clearly is that, first of all, the term fake news just kind of needs to die.
And why is that?
Well, there's a lot of things that are happening, but fake news, it's fake news you get into the prospect of like what is truthiness and what isn't, as opposed to what's actually happening, which is that information is going through a centralized system and a centralized understanding and then being spit back out in these different ways, such as clickbait and so on. And so it's like this sort of...
But don't you think there's merit to that? So there's a reason we trust the New York Times and we don't trust random people's blog posts on Facebook.
Yeah, and I totally agree, but I do think that like when you say fake news, you're focusing on the wrong problem. And the actual problem is this like hyper centralization of information that is then distributed in a way that is like unquantifiable, because the very mechanisms that are powering that sort of distribution are in and of themselves tainted. So I do think that like the blockchain and the projects like Civil are very great for sort of fighting this sort of dystopic understanding of media and what's consumed and what is actually providing value. We're using things like token curated registries, for example, to bring power back to newsrooms and to readerships to be able to create off of a set documented contractual understanding of information that everyone is, a part of, and then being able to use various cryptoeconomic games to be able to say, okay, this is what we're doing and what we're serving at this point. And at least, even if that central point shifts, you can see where it's shifting and why it's shifting and how it's happening. And you can fork from it if you want to. So that's really exciting. And I think that's a pretty powerful thing.
Tyler, I think you have a comment.
Yeah, just a small one. That was a great answer. And to kind of like add on, first off, like the way that you described that balance between centralized and decentralized things, like in what Civil is doing versus what some other places are doing, I think is really good, because it kind of gets to your point about the journalistic integrity of the New York Times, right? And kind of like being that, not necessarily like power that be, but kind of like that trusted voice and presenting that. And that's exactly what, to get back to the fake news thing, I think is the problem, where you see a post from your friend and you're like, oh, that's just my Uncle Joe and he's got his, crazy opinions. But then you see a post that's from like some random, the Daily whatever, and there's countless different variations of that was like some, who knows what type of content farm or clickbait factory that came out of, right? And you see the Cambridge Analytica thing now coming up with Facebook, and that's just been like a huge topic in the news lately, and that just kind of exposes the underlying dangers and maybe like travails and problems that come about when you have this centralized system like Facebook that is kind of so important in distributing the news, less so than actually making the news. And I think that like that difference between the actual content itself and the way that the content is distributed is a really critical and perhaps not enough talked about kind of thing, because in many ways the medium is the message, and eventually what happens is, the way that story was passed around the world becomes part of the story itself. And I think that blockchain has, and projects like Civil especially, are kind of like providing that sense of accountability for people where that doesn't necessarily exist before, and also making it exist in a way that is immutable and can't be kind of controlled by any one centralized party.
Thank you. On the content side, I think about the data or the information that's provided in different news outlets as being almost a similar example to provenance. Where is that original information coming from? And I think that's where blockchain could be pretty instrumental as well. I mean, one of the things that we've been thinking about and looking into is, the city has a lot of open data that's available. The Mayor's Office of Data Analytics publishes a lot of city data. And whether it's that data or other types of data from a variety of different research institutions, academic institutions that's put out there, oftentimes that data is very much manipulated or just falsified completely. And I think that blockchain could be utilized to actually see where's that data originating from, what are the sources of that data as well. And I think that's pretty powerful as a tool to counteract some of the misinformation that's being put out there.
And so if we move into kind of the politics side of things, how do you see blockchain impacting things like local politics and even national politics? I mean, for the people who've been following, there's the Russian election, and supposedly everything went fine, supposedly, allegedly. And so how do you see blockchain kind of affecting politics on that scale? News obviously feeds a lot into that, but then there's an aspect of transparency with voting laws, candidates and their platforms. And do you want to just elaborate a little bit from that front?
I mean, I'll tell you a little bit just kind of from my own opinion. This is not the work that we do at the New York City Economic Development Corporation. But when it comes to voting, I think that going back to kind of the city type of, or I should say government resources or government types of services, there are ways in which blockchain could be utilized to streamline a lot of the types of kind of everyday things that we have to do, like for example, not everyday things, but like voting, for example, how that could be made more seamless. So you see instances in which, instead of having voter intimidation when you go to the polls, instead if you're able to vote very easily and there aren't lines, especially in certain communities where you have to take off work, if you're able to seamlessly vote on your phone or on your laptop, how that's promoting democracy, I think it's a great thing. But I think there are also other considerations in line with that as well. So, later on down the line, I think that from the city of New York, I could say that it's more of a step-by-step type of process. I don't envision in New York City or in New York State this happening immediately. I think that the first step is really educating government officials as to the benefits of these types of technologies. But I think that there's a lot of value that's associated with it in terms of government services.
Say that, I think there are a number of situations in which blockchain might not help, but one way in which I see it does help, and I'm maybe skeptical or cynical, but every time I go vote, I keep thinking, like, how did they take my one vote and know it was this, and somehow roll it up into the districts and the states, and nothing got lost, and it got added up correctly, and there's this number on CNN that comes. There's no way that is exactly what it is. And so if you could have, in this ideal blockchain world, my identity mapped to me on the blockchain. At the end of the day, a blockchain is a ledger, so it records information, and it is immutable. It cannot be changed, and it is just there. And so knowing that the vote that I vote is in there, and it is recorded, and it is trackable, like that alone, and having that data and having that information be accurate. I mean, think about like if the issues at the Veterans Affairs where veterans can't get benefits because they have to verify where the veteran serves. Like things like that, I think, are incredibly beneficial. Another application that's decidedly non-sexy is around financial settlement. So in the financial world, once two parties trade, they still have to settle that trade, and there's a big business around settlement and execution and clearing, and so all of that the blockchain does all of that together, and so it removes a lot of these back office functions, and I think in that sense it completely changes the financial ecosystem.
It's very interesting you touch on that. So one thing that I think about and what I've seen also in the work that we've done at BlockchainDriven is looking at what value can the blockchain unlock, and its value which is currently being basically wasted elsewhere. And so if we look at kind of financial services and trade, how much money is spent on investment bankers, on lawyers, on legal fees, and all this other thing, and back and forth, when that money could just be invested elsewhere. And to kind of scale that up, and I have a very big question around this, which is, in the long term, if you imagine a world where you have, let's say, self-driving cars that are powered on the blockchain, and this is very futuristic, but it's also not totally unfeasible. You could all of a sudden unlock a bunch of value at the city level. Things that we spend a lot of money on parking tickets, and 60% of the New York police force is actually involved with traffic on some level. If you could unlock all that value and how that could all be invested into other startup ideas, or that could be invested at the city level for public works, how do you see your projects, blockchain technology at scale, at a future state? How do you think that can change? Big idea. I warned you.
I'll start off.
Yeah,
with
you
this
can
one.
start up.
It's obviously a big idea, but to kind of boil that big idea down into something a little bit more digestible, maybe, it kind of just makes me think about like the idea of automation and what happens as technology advances and more people are kind of pushed out of their current jobs. I've seen this personally in my experience at Vice a lot, where when I was first hired a few years back, we had certain systems that we were using that were operated by like people doing manual database entry and stuff like that. But obviously that's not optimal. You don't want to have to be doing something like that, so you develop a computerized system that will go ahead and take that person's job, right? It sounds scary because if you're that person who's doing that job, suddenly you don't have a job anymore, right? And so there's this kind of gets into a very political conversation, I think, about like skilled and unskilled labor and what that kind of entails and where that all is going to go in a world where a lot of these things can be automated and where computers can take our jobs. Self-driving cars is a perfect example. You look at Tesla and how they have their self-driving cargo trucks now, and that's going to take out a huge portion of the American economy if it actually comes to pass, because right now these truck drivers, I feel like there's a better word to describe those people, are badass people, I guess, yeah, are basically doing this very particular kind of job that currently needs to have a human being literally behind the wheel to make these decisions. And yet, when a computer can do that, then what do those people do? Are they just put out to pasture, so to speak? It might sound a little dark, but we have to also consider the education and training for the next generations there.
Absolutely, and I would say that very much from a political perspective, this is a lot of the work that we've been doing at the New York City Economic Development Corporation, and that's plotting out, as these technologies are coming into play, whether it's blockchain, whether it's artificial intelligence, autonomous vehicles, inevitably they're going to take up, they're going to be part of more and more of our everyday lives and part of our workforce. They're just going to displace people to some extent, but at least certain tasks in certain types of jobs as well. And what we're trying to plot out are, what are those jobs? What are those tasks? what kind of ancillary jobs are going to be out there, to what extent can we actually predict that, where are we seeing these opportunities, and how do we train for that as well. And that's a critical component of the work that we're trying to do, is to try to figure out where these other types of values, that's coming out from these types of jobs, or opening up space for, instead of manual labor, there are opportunities to do other types of value creation. What are they, and how do we prepare our workforce for that as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying sort of brings up the point that, we're asking about, well, what value can the blockchain unlock? And like, in a lot of ways, the blockchain in and of itself is value neutral. It's like asking, like, is a knife good or bad, as one of my colleagues has said before. It's like, the answer is yes. So it's like, it's less about what can the blockchain unlock and much more about how we as individuals and as, job creators, business folks, etc., are really looking at the blockchain and challenging ourselves to think about those new opportunities. So I think that's more of the question. It's more about how are we training ourselves and our minds to be prepared for these new opportunities, because the blockchain itself is not going to unlock anything. You know what I mean? So.
And so following that, what is your advice for everyone here if they need to prepare for this blockchain world? What are your 2 cents?
Oh God, I mean, the singularity is coming. I think the main thing in terms of just preparation and so on, I mean, that sounds like I'm doomsday prepping. I didn't even know where to start this question. I really think that it's just about self-education. It's about educating those of us who work in the space, really understanding what are the other projects that are happening. To Karen's point about like ancillary and complementary markets and things like that, having that sort of wider depth of field, as opposed to, I think there's, typically in a, usual capitalist society, we're all looking for the very next sort of vertical integration of things, and I think blockchain requires us to think in a much broader perspective. So I don't know if that's really so much preparation as common sense, but we're talking about a potentially seismic shift in technology, so we would all do well to think a little bit bigger.
For me, I think blockchain changes the role of the company. And so if you think about the role of a company and organization, it's a centralized, it pays you to do this one task, and you have these, hierarchical levels in it. And there are a number of projects such as Colony where you can be an individual contributor and get paid for your skill set through the blockchain. And so project teams form and then they disperse. You don't have to work for a company. And I think we're seeing this trend more and more with contractors and a number of that, the sharing economy. You can, if you're an Uber driver, you're on your own schedule. And so I think there's something there, and it's really exciting because it allows you to you almost aren't limited by, you aren't hired to this one thing. And so I was previously at a company called Zappos, an e-commerce company in Las Vegas, and we operated under a system called holacracy, where we had no managers, no bosses. It sounded a little bit chaotic, but it was actually a decentralized autonomous organization like the blockchain. And so there was actually good and bad. I mean, the good was really great. Like, people could work on ideas that they were interested in as long as they related to the purpose of the company. The bad was it still, you still had these rules, and there are people, and people do work differently, and so you can't just solve everything with automation and technology. And so we saw, and you can Google it very publicly, there was good and bad to this. But I will say I'm most excited about the fact that you can kind of contribute in all these different ways. Another kind of tangent, but I was reminded of it, is this company called Earn.com, and I'm in business development, so my whole job is to like find people and reach out to them, and vice versa. And Earn is basically a reputation management system, where you can put yourself on there, and basically for a price, $1, $5, $10, it goes to charity. You can have, people can pay to email you. And so it's this interesting thing. A lot of us joke about our LinkedIn mailboxes. I don't know if anyone actually reads through their LinkedIn mailbox, and vice versa. It's not an efficient system. And so adding structures like this, where you can basically have your own brand, your own reputation, and monetize that in a way that makes sense.
Yeah. Both of those are really great answers, and I don't even know where to begin to kind of tack onto those next. But I'm going to start with your answer to when he asked, is blockchain good or bad? And you were like, yes. Because I love that answer, first off, because so I'm quoting this, but there was an article in I think it was the Harvard Business Review, called "The Truth About Blockchain," totally casual title. And deeper into that article, there's one line, and they said that blockchain is not I'm going to add in classically disruptive technology, it's a foundational technology. And what that means is that it's not going to come in like Uber did to the taxi cab industry or like Airbnb did to the hotel industry, right? And disrupt the existing things while keeping those structures in place. Like your point before about the decentralized kind of hotel exchanges, blockchain is completely reestablishing the very foundations that we think about these entire concepts on. And that's, to me, why it's so powerful and why I think we're all here. But you also kind of talked about, like, you said, how do you spell it? Earn, E-A-R-N. Cool. I wasn't sure if it was like, earn. I was like, I'm pretty sure it's not that way. So that, I hate to compare it to this, but it made me think of Clout, which some of you may remember was a startup a few years back that tried to give you like a social ranking based off of your followers and likes and engagement, et cetera, on different social networks, right? And so it was like this whole, I remember like when this first came out, we were like joking about it in our Slack channel or IRC channel at The Verge, and we were just like, oh, like see who could, a bunch of those people had like large Twitter followers and stuff, so we would joke around about it. But at that time it was a joke, and now there's things like this happening. But then in China, you see that they're actually instituting a new thing that is literally going to give people a social ranking, right? And so this system is going to become mandatory starting in 2020. Right now it's just opt-in, and you could like go into it if you're like some person who's like ready to like have the government and like classify you as a person. But your point about homeless people before, sorry, your point. I don't want to like steal your thunder here, but like that idea basically was their whole idea with the social ranking system in China is that you can, if you're a homeless person, you have like a low social ranking, you're not allowed to ride the subway, or you're not allowed to like withdraw money from an ATM or something like that. So there's potentially like actually like really serious kind of implications for these things. So I know there's a lot of stuff to unpack. Again, sorry, a big answer, but.
Sounds like a Black Mirror episode.
I was going to say, underscoring what Tyler said, I think one of the most exciting parts about blockchain is thinking about how this entire infrastructure, how systems are going to be completely different than kind of systems that we currently have right now. I think there's going to have to be a lot of rethinking about current infrastructure that we have as well, whether it's government infrastructure that currently exists or whether it's company infrastructure, kind of these centralized bodies. Even just thinking about these kind of opportunities to disintermediate, like for example, with Uber, with Airbnb. If you're creating value as a driver and you have a customer, just rethinking the entire system in which if the driver is able to get compensated more from that customer, do they have to work as much? Does that mean that there's going to be less of a supply? Does that mean that there are more people who are going to come into the system? So it's kind of interesting to think about how people who are creating the value themselves might be compensated in a greater fashion. But then it kind of makes us think as well, with all these larger institutions that are currently the centralized bodies, what happens to all of those jobs as well? But that's why I'm saying that it's kind of interesting to think about how a lot of these different types of structures, whether they're government structures or whether they're kind of central authorities, what's going to end up happening with them. And I think that there's a lot of potential there and a lot of experimentation that's currently happening where there's a lot of excitement around what the potential in the future holds.
Cool. So I want to move to audience questions in just a second. Before we do that, I have a quick fire round. Try and keep it under like 30 seconds. The first question is, which is your favorite blockchain project and why?
You can start that one.
Civil.
Really?
Shocking, I know. No, but let me not play that card. But I think it's probably a toss-up between Ujo or Upgraded, just for the reasons that I said earlier. I'm very interested in how creatives are part of the compensation process, how they're part of their own self-governance and self-direction as businesses, which is also why I love Civil.
Yes.
So that's that.
I'm gonna give 3 answers to this question, but they're all kind of
That's not
connected.
allowed.
Sorry, I'm gonna do it anyway, Nick. I'm sorry. So it's Steam It and Poet, and then Basic Attention Token by Mozilla. Because for me, as someone who's interested in media, I think that those 3 tokens all talk about 3 different problems that are currently plaguing media. I don't think any of them actually solve it in a way that satisfies me as someone who's really curious and kind of hungry to find a solution here. But I think that they're all doing incredible work, and they're all, most importantly to me, and this is why I'm so excited to be speaking here with you about Civil, because
You've got 5 seconds.
They're also all actually making utility and doing things on the blockchain now.
So I'm really excited about the tokenization of real-world assets. So there's a company called Digix that actually takes gold and puts it on the blockchain. They're diamond startups that do this, art, real estate. I think you could, in the blockchain world, you can take almost anything, tokenize it, and trade it without borders. I mean, without borders, basically around the world. That's the first time in human history anyone can do this, and I'm just really excited about that part of it.
I would say that just going back to a lot of the ways in which it's applied in the social services, in education, for example, like EduDAO is one of them that I think is very interesting. It's like Donors Choose, but it's on the blockchain instead. Other types of kind of innovative ways in which blockchain is being utilized by governments, I think is pretty interesting to help streamline, like I said, a lot of access that people will be able to get to those types of services.
Cool. Last question.
What did you call it? What's that?
EduDAO, EDUDAO.
Education Decentralized Autonomous Organization. Final question. Which is your favorite source for crypto news, blockchain news? Where can they go to learn more about this?
This is a terrible answer, I'm sorry, but it's like Twitter and Reddit and Steemit and just like, it's like the worst because it's like, go to these centralized platforms, we're talking about decentralized stuff. I like, I can't believe I'm blanking on the name because it's Coinbase is the only thing that's in my head.
CoinDesk?
CoinDesk, thank you. I like those guys a lot. They're probably like my preferred main thing, but really just those.
I would just, I would echo that. I think CoinDesk is pretty solid. I also wanted to say that we're partnering with them to have Blockchain Week in New York City this week, and so we're very excited about the work that they're doing. I'm sorry, this year. It's May 11th through the 17th.
For me, I think it's, it's just going to meetups like this, talking to other people, and I'm a non-technologist, and so actually trying to mine Bitcoin on my MacBook and things like that, and going to just actually doing it, because for me reading it is I can read and get myself into a black hole, but then I get a ledger and try and recover it with my seed, and that's how I learn. So.
Yeah, I think for me the things I read are obviously Twitter. I have 1,001 newsletters that I try and get to when I can. Hacker Noon is always fun in terms of just contextualizing what's going on across not just blockchain but across the entire technological and innovative space. Fred Arison's got a great Medium, so those sorts of things. I generally have set it and forget it at this point. So if anyone wants me to forward them my newsletters, I'm happy to do that.
Yes. Can I say one more? Also, this is just a general technology site, but stratechery.com.
Sorry.
It's a general technology site, but he does talk about crypto sometimes. Stratechery.com by Ben Thompson. It's just overall amazing technology news. Talks about Apple and Google and all those guys, but also cryptocurrencies and the economy stuff.
Yeah, he's great. He does a lot of strategy plus technology, hence the name. Okay, audience questions. Who has a question?
Hi, my name is Brooke Guthrie, and I come from I've been in the data world, IT world, consulting world, and I'm very interested, Karen, because the more I learn about blockchain, especially for a city that's so progressive like New York City, what are you all doing? Because I know your organization is doing a lot, but what are you all doing to plan to help those government workers transition to the new blockchain world, because they won't have the same job responsibilities, but there will be government jobs, but they'll just be different government jobs. So how are you all being more proactive or reactive, and how are you all planning on dealing with that fear of change to that, especially for government workers who really like to come in and really be safe and steady? And this is something new and different.
No, that's a great question. We're trying to be as proactive as possible to this. I think that there's a lot in the news about blockchain and Bitcoin. There's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of hype around it. And we want to make sure first and foremost that across the board, city agencies are aware of what blockchain is. So the first step that we're trying to do is just educate people. So that's really at the forefront of what we're thinking about right now. How do we make sure that they know what blockchain is? They're not associating it with any kind of scams. They realize what the technology is and what its potential is. That might lead to use cases later on down the line in which they're able to identify what are effective uses of blockchain, not because there's hype associated with it, not because there are other types of technologies that would better serve them, or they could just use a database, but maybe blockchain would be help them in terms of efficiencies. And then from that, what we're trying to do is just kind of step by step to see what are the functions that are being eliminated, where is there other opportunities for value creation instead. And plotting that out, I think that if we're less in a position to be reactive, but more in a position to start educating people, communicating with them, and being thoughtful in what opportunities lie ahead, we can better prepare them for those types of opportunities and jobs, and really be able to come out with not necessarily doing the kind of rote work, the manual work that's there, a lot of the paperwork and the administration that's underlying it. But like if you see similar to Dubai, the amount of administrative work that they've been able to kind of cut down on is significant. And how are they able to utilize their workers in other ways that are more beneficial to the society as a whole, I think is pretty instructive. So trying to look at what other parallel governments are doing and how we can learn from that, and also prepare our workers in a way that's just very deliberate.
Any more questions? At the back, except I'm going to have to.
Hello, testing. All right. How do you get your average mom and pop investor to move over to decentralized exchanges? I remember when I first started trading and trying to use Ether Delta a long time ago, and I was like, I'm never using this again. So I just wonder how you get your average person to do that, and what's the incentive to use AirSwap over all the other decentralized exchanges? And one other thing, Tyler, since you shilled a basic attention token, I love that token. Also, AdBank, ADB, check it out.
Okay, cool. I'll take the second point. So what's the benefit of using AirSwap? One, it's a no-fee platform. So similar to a Robinhood or something of the sort, many of the other decentralized platforms are charging fees. So I'd say that's a very clear advantage. The first point is a really interesting question. A lot of these aren't intuitive to use, and I find that sometimes using them is you have to have Ethereum, first of all. How do you get Ethereum? Well, you have Bitcoin. How do you get Bitcoin? Well, you have to find a way to turn your dollars into Bitcoin. So there are a number of on-ramps to get to that point. So what we're doing is, one is making the interface extremely just intuitive. So if you go to the AirSwap site, you can actually trade. You don't need an account, so you don't have to register, you put in your ID and wait 4 days for it to get approved. So you can just do it immediately. It's very clean. And we're also actively talking to wallets. And so essentially you can use a wallet, and we don't necessarily have to build it, but there are many, many other crypto wallet solutions. And then we provide the back-end liquidity. So you're using Status, or you're using a Toshi app or something like that, and or you're using WhatsApp, or whatever that looks like, and then you want to trade something, and you're just accessing the tokens in AirSwap, but we might not face you on the front end.
Thanks, everybody. Really interesting perspective. One thing that we didn't really touch on, and that I'm really excited about in terms of future smart cities, is just energy. So curious to hear some perspectives on how blockchain can modernize and revolutionize the energy consumption, because obviously things like mining requires a considerable amount of energy.
So that's a really interesting one, and that's actually one of the topics that I can't speak for anyone else, but I haven't really thought about that a whole lot. But it's funny because whenever I'm really into Tesla and I like a lot what they're doing, but the kind of power wall technology that they have, how they have those giant batteries that's basically like a Tesla battery that you just stick in your garage. I always thought that would be really interesting if you combined it with some solar panels and stuck it on someone's roof, and then use the solar panels to feed into the battery, and then you kind of have, or wind power, or whatever renewable energy source you want to use. You could then kind of use that to funnel into this place to store it and then pass it out. But when you think about how blockchain could implement it into that system, you could actually use it to kind of set up like a peer-to-peer kind of system where you're like, oh, Steve down the street has some extra power, and I'm out of stuff in my battery this week, so he can share with me. And then you can track and record all the exact transactions that go along with that. So
there are projects that are in experimentation right now, and there are use cases as well that are doing exactly that. In Brooklyn, there's LO3 that's doing that right now. I know that in Australia, there's a company based out of Australia, and they have a number of pilot projects throughout the world. They're called Power Ledger as well. And they're doing exactly that, whether it's through renewable types of energy sources. It's a peer-to-peer type of transaction that happens where you're able to store energy and you're able to provide excess energy to your peers. This is kind of going back to what we were talking about before, which is kind of the exciting aspect of both creating new types of infrastructures and new types of systems, and also new types of markets as well.
Yeah, and just to touch on the misconception there, not all blockchains actually are power intensive. It just depends on the consensus mechanism. So there are blockchains which actually consume almost no power. I mean, no more than your laptop currently does now. And so it's important to differentiate that. And then in terms of the projects, the thing about energy grid, and one of the reasons we didn't touch on it, has to do with there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to go into place, which is not dependent on the peer-to-peer aspect. So for you to be able to put your energy and sell it back to the grid and have that be distributed equally, like that involves the grid actually being quite advanced and sophisticated. There's a project out of Consensus called Grid Plus, which does that in their white paper. It's worth checking out. Any more questions?
Thank you for this, and just as a shameless plug for the making it simple and easy for the humans, human-centered design aspect. We are starting a blockchain UX meetup, so look for that on Meetup. But my question, you talked about, and actually this is one of the reasons why I got so heavily involved in this last year, was the idea of the distributed ledger somehow facilitating accreditation. And we talked a little about, I can't remember who it was exactly, talking about helping displaced workers and the reskilling, and particularly with this autonomous vehicle. I think you had mentioned as an aspect. What else are we seeing out there that's helping these folks that are potentially losing their jobs and their livelihood, and maybe somehow the technology is actually part of the solution to this problem?
It's a great question.
You.
All I'm going to say on that is that there's not enough happening yet, but there should be more.
I would say that that's one of the projects that we work on. We try to figure out what are the types of reskilling that needs to happen, what are the types of training that needs to take place as well. Is it on a university level? Is it boot camps? Are there workshops? And what level of kind of expertise or what level of education do you need to have before you can participate in some of these programs? So we're very mindful of this, and we realize that there is a lot of reskilling that needs to happen, and how do we make sure that we're preparing workers across the board, some who might not have the kind of developer expertise that's needed in areas like blockchain right now, but what are the other types of jobs that are out there, and how do we skill them for those jobs? And in addition to those types of boot camps and training projects, we're also thinking about hands-on types of training, so apprenticeship programs too. So we're very much cognizant of this, and there are a number of programs that we have at the New York City Economic Development Corporation. We're right now putting together our blockchain strategy, so that has, we're in the process of building that out. But I can give you an example of some of the other types of technologies that we're working on. One is that a project that I lead is a virtual reality, augmented reality lab that is the first publicly funded lab in the country that's focused on that. And it's being built out right now. And that's also going to have workforce development components of it. One of our partners is actually at CUNY Lehman up in the Bronx, and they have a workforce development program to help people get trained in VR and AR types of jobs as well. And this is open to the community, and you get a certificate afterwards, and they also pair you up with kind of apprenticeships and pilot programs as well. There's another program that we're working on right now, which is at its very early stages, but we're reviewing proposals, and that's for a cybersecurity hub in New York City. And that has quite a few workforce development training programs as well. So across the board, not only with blockchain, but we're very mindful of the reskilling that needs to happen and all the various strata of jobs that are potential jobs within those technologies.
In a minute. We'll just do two more questions from. Or did you have a comment?
Okay. On that also, I think you'll start to notice that a lot of blockchain startups and businesses are really invested in just general education because it's so crucial to adoption. So whether that's reskilling or just helping people understand the basic underlying concepts, like if any of this is actually going to take off as an industry, it's the industry makers who are going to have to take a lot of effort to make sure that people are properly educated to be able to interact. So
Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Blake. I work in marketing. First of all, thank you for the insights. My question's for Lillian. Lillian, you mentioned self-governance. I'm wondering if you could elaborate on what that means in the context of what you're working on at Civil. And then secondly, what have you found to be best practice in validating the veracity of the content that Civil is sort of working with, and what have, from where you're sitting, what are some best practices for media entities that want to sort of maybe take some notes from what Civil's doing?
Sure. So starting kind of from your second question, working backwards, I think Civil itself as a technology platform is not in and of itself introducing some sort of technological solution to look at a line of text and say this is true or this is false or this is right or this is wrong. But what we are doing is creating a baseline set of principles that are enmeshed into the system that anyone who's participating within that system then has to actually adhere to. So when we're talking about self-governance and so on, what we're talking about is utilizing the Civil token, which is CDL, to participate in saying, we as a group are going to adhere to this system that exists here, and we're going to make sure that other participants are also adhering. So you're using token curated registries to ensure that new participants are adhering to the previous stated goals and so on that our Constitution is upholding onto what was said.
Thank you. Just to go back to the question of adoption, I think with adoption, something I'm very interested in myself. I think with adoption, like any new technology, I think the tendency is for, when you're on the inside of it, you think it's just a matter of education, it's just a matter of writing the right white paper, the right message, just getting the message out. If you give mom and pop or the board of directors the right pamphlet, then that's going to be half the battle. But how much of the adoption problem is also a matter of recognizing points of resistance, and that there may be many sectors where resistance is going to be very strong. The more you educate somebody about the blockchain solution, the greater that resistance is going to be. And I think one example is the idea of voting capability. There's a lot of maybe a lot of resistance to the idea of making voting totally open. I mean, this is a problem that not a lot of people are trying to solve, right? And the reason we're trying to solve it is because we're working against that in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you're looking at points of resistance, you're looking at two types, right? You're looking at institutional resistance and you're looking at interpersonal resistance. So when you're talking about institutional resistance, I mean, there is a lot to be said about how do you get government to catch up to technology? How do you get law and like various legal practice to technology to catch up to technology? Right now, a regular individual person could go to one blockchain lawyer and get one piece of advice, and then go to another and get one that's vastly different, or telling you that you're running completely afoul of like regulatory law or whatever it might be. So I think on one side of adoption there is that governmental element, and I think a lot of that is just a matter of the straightforward lobbying for recognition as a verifiable, business and entity and industry. I think on the person-to-person level, it's a totally different situation. So you're right, education is, for some people, there just isn't that. For some people, what's going to hook them is that, it's got a great interface and we have excellent product design. For other people, it's going to be that they've just heard about it enough, and it's, so there are certain marketing elements that start to play into, which nobody wants to talk about because it sounds devilish, but it is true. And so I think from a person-to-person perspective, the best you can do is start to bucket it and think about like, okay, if the education adoption's not getting you, and the marketing outreach isn't getting you, and the hand-holding, however that might be, and the cool product design, then it's a possibility that this is just a person who probably won't adopt for another 10 years, if at all. And that's just, that's kind of the curve. And the most we can do is do the best we can to make it as widely adopted as possible. But I think realistically, you're not gonna get everybody, which is maybe cynical, but.
I think there's one other component as well in addition to that, and that is kind of the institutional resistance that you're going to see eventually, whether it's companies that are these kind of mainstream, like traditional types of companies, or whether it's governments. Ultimately, they're going to be pushed to adopt these types of technologies because everybody else around them they are. So other governments, if they have streamlined, ways to pay parking bills and to vote online, and if we see that we're falling behind as compared to other countries, eventually the constituents are going to be the ones who are pushing for that type of change. So even I think in kind of mainstream companies and institutions, it might be very much against their self-interest right now to adopt these types of technologies that would take away their value proposition. But ultimately, I think that they're going to have to realize that, kind of similar to automation, it's coming. And what are they going to do to create value and to demonstrate their value, because it's inevitable.
Yeah, just to add on one more point. This is very optimistic and perhaps a little idealistic of me, but I think that the rate of adoption and especially familiarity within the public mainstream of blockchain, and especially like Bitcoin, is happening at a much quicker rate than any technology adoption before it. You look at like the rise of mobile phones and social networks that kind of came alongside with that, and that happened pretty quickly. But then, a better example is the internet and how the first kind of actual networking TCP/IP happened in the early 70s and took decades to actually become a thing that was adopted. But now you look at mobile and see how quickly that rose. I think that blockchain is going to have that kind of ascendance at an even faster rate. Just the fact that mainstream cable news networks are talking about Bitcoin now, maybe they're getting the narrative wrong, but I think that it's a step in the right direction at the very least.
Yeah, and just to touch on that, one thing that we've seen at BlockchainDriven is that these technologies, particularly blockchain, isn't quite a science yet in terms of adoption. There's a lot of art associated with it, and so it's really case specific. It's really dependent on who you're trying to target. And ultimately, what we've seen is that the best way blockchain works is actually as an invisible technology. It's not as a marketing tool. It's rather in terms of what value is it providing and how do you do that in a really good way. We'll do the last question.
Hi, thank you for sharing. So I actually really appreciate that you brought up the social credit score that China has started to implement. That's that's making Orwell turn over in his grave. It's pretty crazy stuff. So I think it's really cool that a lot of you guys are operating on some admittedly very optimistic assumptions. You have to do that. You have to have that sense of belief to actually be able to work on something that doesn't exist. But if you think about it, we are creating all this data and it's very sensitive. We see what happens when that data gets in the hands of somebody who might not be the most well-intentioned person. So with a lot of these, blockchain startups, especially if, say, someone got a quantum computer and they were with a centralized organization and they could break all this encryption and then get access to all of that data, are a lot of people considering the outcome where people don't really understand data governance, of making really simple personal kill switches on your own data within this blockchain, at a certain, are people really considering that at all? Or making it easy to port your data from one blockchain to another? Because I think that's one of those things that if that other technology comes and pushes centralization back, push the pendulum in the other direction, we've created all this data that could be really, really, really harmful if it gets in the wrong hands.
That's a doozy for the last question right there. So I'm going to bring up Ben Thompson's trajectory point, actually. He has this is kind of his main theme that he has throughout this several-year history of his blog. It's called aggregation theory, right? And he talks about the unbundling and rebundling of, you look at Netflix versus cable TV, and then you look at this whole net neutrality debate where suddenly we're we want it all, and then it's actually, no, I just want Instagram. I don't like Facebook or Twitter or Pinterest. I just want Instagram. I'm just going to pay for Instagram, and net neutrality is maybe going away, and that will be the world that we live in. I hope not. But in that world of bundling versus unbundling, what you were saying before about that, the true decentralized aspects of this, I think, is why this is so important, and it's such a great question to me, because that hits cuts through all of the stuff that is kind of the fluff around it, right? You're getting straight to the heart of that steak, right? And I don't know if there's answers to that necessarily, because in my opinion, we're still in the pre-internet bubble burst of the late 90s with respect to blockchain technology. I think there's a lot of history that's yet to be made. But people asking questions like that, and I think all of us talking about that, are the ways to make sure that we make the right decisions in the future.
And I mean, there are projects that are popping up specifically around users owning their own data. Whether or not they have the protections to deal with like a super nefarious individual with a massive quantum computer, I don't know. But you've got projects in the space like U4 and so on that are very much about governing their own self-identity across the blockchain, and I'm sure there are plenty more that do that, and other ones that are even letting you charge companies for giving you ads and things like that. So I think it's very much in the minds of a lot of blockchain engineers who came to the blockchain primarily for the promise of being able to have this complete autonomy and freedom of your own data. So I think if your question is, are people thinking about it, the answer definitely seems to be yes.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, there's a project I worked on with a financial services company where they hired some PhD guys out of University of Toronto that are working on quantum proof encryption algorithms using asymmetric mathematical equations. And so there is conversation. Actually, there are proof of concepts where even with quantum computers, there is encryption that could survive that. The bigger concern is more with, and we're getting way out there, is artificial intelligence on quantum computers and what you could achieve with that. On that note, thank you for coming. I think the panelists will hang around for a quick Q&A afterwards, but just a round of applause for everyone. Thank you very much.